Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today as we celebrate teaching and learning at Columbia. I'm Amanda Irvin, Executive Director of the Center for Teaching and Learning. And as I'm sure many of you know, the Center for Teaching and Learning gets to work with faculty and graduate student instructors as they think about and innovate in their teaching. So we have the privilege of witnessing firsthand the extraordinary teaching that happens on this campus. It's definitely something to celebrate. And this year is extra special because we are also celebrating the CTL's 10th anniversary. Today's discussion, which I'm personally really excited about, kicks off a series of events to celebrate teaching and learning that will continue through the fall semester, so stay tuned. We've got a great conversation planned today with some truly remarkable Columbia University teachers, folks who both exemplify Columbia's dedication to teaching and learning and are strong leaders and supporters of pedagogical innovation. So, our plan today is to reflect on the last 10 years, looking back down the teaching and learning mountain, so to speak, and then reflect forward. Talk about what excites us about the future of education, what we want to be a part of, and maybe even make some predictions. We'll be sure to save some time at the end for questions from our audience, so feel free to add your questions throughout using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I will introduce my colleagues as they join me on the Zoom screen. Monica Lypson is the Vice Dean for Education at Columbia University Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons and serves as the Rolf H. Scholdager Professor of Medicine at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. She previously served as professor and vice chair of medicine, division director of general internal medicine at the George Washington University School of Medical and Health Sciences, and as director of medical and dental education for the Department of Veterans Affairs. She has been serving as the generalist community as national secretary and president of the Society of General Internal Medicine. She's also an associate editor for Academic Medicine. In these roles, Dr. Lypson provides leadership for a diverse group of faculty and learners involved in educational innovation, medical education research, and community outreach. Next, we have Larry Jackson, who is Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, Director of the Witten Center for the Core Curriculum, and a lecturer in philosophy at Columbia University. He teaches literature humanities, contemporary civilization, and music humanities in Columbia's core curriculum, and a course on justice for the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society in the Eric H. Holder Initiative for Civil and Political Rights. Prior to Columbia, Larry held positions at the New School for Social Research, New York University, and the City University of New York. His writing has appeared in peer-reviewed academic journals and popular publications, and he lectures internationally on education and philosophy. Originally from the greater Philadelphia area, Dr. Jackson was the first in his family to attend college. David Helfand, professor of astronomy at Columbia, is a distinguished educator with a deep commitment to innovative teaching and pedagogy, with a particular passion for making science accessible to non-science majors. Over the course of his nearly 5 decades at Columbia, he served nearly half that time as chair of the Department of Astronomy. He also played a pivotal role in the core curriculum by introducing Frontiers of Science, which since 2005 has engaged all first-year students with scientific inquiry. David has mentored 22 PhD students, authored over 200 scientific papers, and published books such as A Survival Guide to the Misinformation Age, reflecting his dedication to critical thinking and science literacy in public discourse. Beyond Columbia, he was instrumental in founding Quest University Canada, serving as its president and vice chancellor, and leading its pioneering approach to higher education. He currently chairs the American Institute of Physics and served as president of the American Astronomical Society. And I could not be more delighted to welcome all three of you into this Zoom room with me. What heavy hitters we have here. Let's talk about teaching, shall we? So I have mentioned before, and I'll say it again, I'm hoping that this can be a conversational space for us to think about teaching over the years. Where have we been and where are we going? And the first question that I'm just delighted to ask you, because the CTL has been around for 10 years, but the extraordinary work of teaching on this campus has been happening for a lot longer. And we're so excited to bear witness to it. When we think about, let's just take the slice of 10 years though, the changes that have happened both across higher ed, but then in our personal practices. Let's kick things off by maybe thinking through what is the most meaningful change that each of you feels like you've made in your teaching practice over the last 10 years? And if you can attribute it to something like a student or an experience or something you read, or maybe even technology, the world, what inspired that change? And if anybody's eager, you're welcome to go first. All right, Larry, you're smiling, so I'm going to ask, like, you want to kick us
Okay,
off?
I should have known better. Amanda, thank you so much. And it's wonderful to have you at the helm at the CTL, and happy anniversary to the CTL. And thank you for all that you do. I'm really delighted to be a part of this celebration, and it's a great honor to be on this panel with you, Monica, and David, my old friend and colleague from the core curriculum. So I think the thing that has struck me the most over the last 10 years, and probably what has led to the greatest number of changes in the classroom for me, has been just how digital our students have really become. And in my own observations, it seems that that trend has really accelerated in the wake of the pandemic. Not only did we shift academic practices, our reading and discussion practices online during that pandemic period, but I think a number of really crucial moments in students' social development, in the kinds of interactions that they were having with one another, were also rendered virtual. And so I've noticed that students now seem to be very comfortable and confident in the digital world and a little less so in the real world or the face-to-face world. So I've really tried to adjust practices that emphasize that kind of face-to-face interaction among my students. It's easy. I'm usually teaching small seminars. But I have a number of things that I'm doing differently now that are trying to get the students really focused on one another and talking to one another. I try to engage them early on
Hmm.
in the class. Open the class with some soft questions that get them warmed up, get them talking with one another. Sometimes that means that I'm not providing some of the context and background that I might have offered previously in my teaching. And I try to feather that in later in the class if I think it's really important for the conversations. But I found that getting them talking right away early in the class loosens them up and gets them to look at one another and to engage with one another. And that helps throughout the duration of the 2 hour seminar. I'm doing a lot more group work and pairing up in class. I'm not doing this always as prefabricated group activities that I've thought up in advance. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, turn to the person next to you and answer this question, or look at this passage together, or think a little bit about this. Outside of class, I'm doing a lot more group assignments than I used to years ago. I'm trying to really create a sensus communis for students in the class. And I'm trying to give them a sense also that when they hit roadblocks in the class, the best thing to do isn't to go to Wikipedia or Google or AI, but it's to go to their classmates. So getting them to know one another and to work together and to rely on one another is a really important part of what I'm doing. In the last year or so, I've been trying to give students also a little more space just to have some open discussion that isn't necessarily tied that closely to the text or the material that we're reading in class. I'm giving them a little more space to talk about some of the big questions that we address in the core curriculum. What is justice? What is freedom? And close the laptops, put your devices away. You can refer to the texts, that's fine. But I also want to just give them space to talk and just exchange ideas and questions. And then the last thing I'll just say that I've been doing a lot of in the last couple of years is requiring meetings with me as well. So at least one, if not two, office hour sessions with me one-on-one. That's really an opportunity for me to get to know their ideas. I get to know their voices as writers. And I think that also makes them feel a little more confident when they're in the classroom. It's an investment of time, But in some ways, I feel like I make up that time at the end of the semester. Um, I know the students work pretty well when they're submitting their final papers to me. I know what I'm looking for in those papers. I'm not sitting there on Christmas Eve with a daunting tower of ungraded papers that I'll be reading for the first time. So
Mhm.
in many ways, I feel like it's an investment of time up front, which then pays off for me as well towards the end of the semester.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Larry. I think one of the things that really struck me is the scaffolded way you are teaching students how to become a learning community. I keep thinking about something you just said about teaching students how to rely on each other rather than going to digital tools. And I think when students, any type of community, recognizes each other as like relies on one another and thinks like we are better together than we are as individuals, that's when you see some real magic happen in a learning community because then we start learning from each other and that's what we're hoping to cultivate for sure. Monica, do you want to go next and then we'll finish up with David?
I'm sure Larry had me thinking about the science behind actually what he's doing. So I think what has impacted me is actually the neuroscience behind learning. I think in the prior to the last 10 years, I sit at the medical school. And last 10 years, we didn't know how the brain actually worked. How did knowledge lay down its sort of physical footprint in the neuron? And so the question that has started to become answered, quite frankly, on our campus is there is a science to learning, and often it's not the way that all of us learned is actually not the best way. Right. So Larry was talking about active learning, right? Like this idea that you need to come into the classroom. It's not about the sage on the stage. It's really about what the learner brings into the classroom and knowing that that actually is uncomfortable. So I have started to feel more comfortable with the learner being uncomfortable. And this gets a little bit, I think, we were driven with like teaching evaluations. We have been driven with satisfaction on the learner side, but sometimes focusing too much on that actually, I think, blocks learning. And we know that not only do we need to create inclusive learning environments where people feel comfortable, as Larry said, talking and bringing their perspective, but they also need to know that they're not going to be comfortable. They're going to hear things that they don't want to hear. They're going to be exposed to ideas and concepts that they might never have heard before, or is just pressing against that zone of proximal knowledge. And the question is, how do you make them feel safe, but also push them? Because if we don't push them, I think we are doing a dissatisfaction. And then I think the interesting thing that I think the medical school thinks about that Larry mentioned about you talk about critical thinking. We talk about clinical reasoning, right? It's the same process, is that we actually have to build that way of thinking. We have to give them some opportunities to actually experience that in a safe place before, in my case, they get to the clinical space. But also in the clinical space that, it's okay to say, I don't know. And so back to not only the learner, dispensing somewhat of learner satisfaction, but also getting faculty and myself to be very comfortable with, I don't know.
Mhm.
Very comfortable with this concept that the learner actually might know more than I do on a given topic, a given piece of information, and how do I incorporate that into my own learning? I think has been important, and then helping faculty with that, because I think in my role, often of thinking about faculty development, faculty don't like being novices, especially on my campus, right? Where people are usually the expert in the room. When you put them in a situation where they're learning something for the first time in terms of how to manage a clinical bedside teaching, how to manage a small group in the classroom. I think giving faculty also a safe space to do that is important.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. This idea of productive discomfort or productive challenge, I think is so key for our students. But to your point, Monica, it's key for instructors as well. Many of the ways that I learned, which tend to inform the ways we then teach, don't align with what we know about the science of learning. And so, kind of accepting that and saying, like, perhaps there is a better way. And Monica, before we transition to David, I should have mentioned at the very beginning, and to our audience at home, Monica will have to leave us around 12:30 to accept a Lifetime Achievement Award. So we said, okay, if you must. So we'll try and get to the Q&A before that point. So if you have any questions for Dr. Lypson, please do drop them into the Q&A. Okay, David, please close us out thinking about meaningful changes in teaching practices.
Well, I'm fascinated by the fact that we all came up with the same thing. My biggest change is incorporating active collaborative exercises in a lecture classroom when you've got 50 or 100 people. Uh, I must confess I learned this slightly before CTL when my experiment in Canada in our bunch of remarkable colleagues and students. But I have a suite of simulations which allows the students to discover knowledge for themselves rather than me conveying it. And it's just transformational. You hear people go, oh, they never say that when I'm lecturing. But when they're running a simulation and see how a photon interacts with an atom or how the moon phases interact with the sun, then they have gained something through their own effort of exploration rather than having it fed to them. And it's much, much more effective. When I was president of the Quest, I spent a lot of time traveling around North America recruiting students. And whenever we had a panel of someone from government, someone from private sector, someone from the nonprofit sector, and they were asked, what are you not getting from today's university graduates that you need? The first answer was always, they don't know how to collaborate with people from different backgrounds to solve problems for my organization. And that's because we have, especially in STEM, the competitive model of introductory science rather than the collaborative model. And I find the latter works much better.
Yeah, thank you. The collaboration and I hear this sort of as like a through line of partnering with our students, getting our students to partner with each other, to engage actively with one another. Um, it's we have to facilitate that. We have to teach them how to work with each other and how to engage with one another. And when they start doing that, the brain sort of lights up, just like you said, David. We've got this like, oh, like now I understand differently. Thank you all. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, the CTL is turning 10 in 2025. We're really excited. And we have lots of digital confetti to help us celebrate, which is the best kind because you don't have to clean it up. And you all have been such extraordinary supporters of the CTL. You've engaged with the CTL around your own teaching. You've also encouraged colleagues to engage with us. We've done lots of programs in partnership with you. And so just selfishly, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your engagement with CTL and engaging with, like the science of learning or educational development as a discipline has changed your teaching practice, if you have some examples of the ways it's changed the way you think about your teaching, or also the conversations, because we love to start conversations about teaching and learning within disciplines and across disciplines. So how these conversations, you might have seen them change in your departments or disciplines. And Monica, because you might need to run, can we start with
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, I think that's the exciting part. We have an outpost of CTL on the
Mhm.
medical center campus, and I think a lot of what we do at the medical school, specifically as we think about moving the curriculum, thinking about preparing for the doctor of 2050, that's where our current classes will be in the height of their career, is partnering with the educational scientists in CTL to actually deliver what we just talked about, right? That doctor means to teach, but I don't think we ever spend time in medical training learning how to teach in a very volitional way, and besides our patients. And so one of the things that CTL brings to the table for our faculty is sort of that science. They're able to deliver that information besides some person of authority saying you have to do this. I think the CTL allows faculty to be those novices. They can explore through the various programming, specifically the grant processing through the provost office and CTL. They can actually advance their careers on the medical campus as clinician educators.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's fantastic to be working with you and the entire CUIMC community. And I know the team at CUIMC has found that extraordinarily fulfilling. David, would you like to go next?
Yes, well, for most of the time CTL has been here, I was chair of Frontiers of
Yeah.
Science, the core curriculum in science, and many of the instructors are on 3 or 4 year appointments as lecturers. And it's been remarkably effective to have workshops run just for that cohort of
Mm.
people. We're going to be teaching 600 first-year students a year in 20 student seminars as to how to run a seminar when you're talking about science, because that's not the traditional classroom approach that most people have been through. So that's been incredibly valuable. And in addition to that, I've sat in on these sessions and learned things. And the first and most trivial thing I learned, but it's really important, is the value of silence. So when you ask a question or pose a problem, of course you know the answer, and so you just wait 3 seconds and then you spit it out. But letting 20 seconds go by allows time for reflection.
Yeah.
I also learned about e-portfolios, which we've incorporated into some classes, which provide an excellent opportunity for students to reflect on what they know, which is something that's far, far too rare in our undergraduate education. In particular, we developed an ignorance log. So every week, the student and the faculty member had to write down something they knew and was wrong, or something they didn't even know they didn't know, the unknown unknowns. And this forces students to reflect on what they're doing and allows them to take that away from them, away from the class and away from their undergraduate education, I think, in a very productive way.
Thank you. I just wrote down ignorance log. That's when we talk about reflection and metacognition, right? And sort of like learning from the experiences we had. What an extraordinary entry point. Larry.
Thank you, Amanda. Yeah, we work very closely with the CTL and the core curriculum to provide lots of pedagogical support and development for our instructors, who range from advanced PhD students to the most senior tenured professors on campus. So thank you to you, Susanna Claff, Ian Althouse, Nikki Hendrich, for all of the support that you provide. I get to, like David, I get to participate in a lot of these sessions, and I have learned a lot from them. I'll mention two things in particular that I think have been pretty transformative for me. One, I referred earlier to some of the exercises I've been doing in class, which might be a little more improvised to get them talking with one another. The CTL has given me a whole range of tools that I can use in those moments to get students engaging with one another, thinking about the content of the course, and developing their own ideas before sharing them with others. So I think until I had attended some CTL sessions, I never would have thought to actually have my students spend a little time writing down their thoughts before speaking, because my sense of a seminar was that it should be this beautiful cacophony in which there were lots of voices being heard all the time. But to actually, as David was saying, have that moment of some quiet where students are reflecting and gathering their thoughts before speaking is really valuable. And it doesn't always have to be writing either. I love to have my students from time to time actually draw a picture of a particular concept or idea and then unpack it. And it's amazing what we're able to do. So Plato's Allegory of the Cave, book 7 of the Republic, opens with Socrates telling Glaucon, make a picture of education and its lack. So when we read the Republic, I have students do that. And they often draw as what Monica described as the sage on a stage. It's the active authority figure transmitting knowledge to a passive audience. And we use that then as a jumping off point to really discuss what education is, what its goals are, what the aims are that best actually serve those goals. So that's been one set of benefits that I've gotten from my work with the CTL. The CTL has also gotten me to focus a lot on the syllabus. The syllabus, I think, is often undervalued. I've adopted a much more personal tone in my syllabus. It's now all in the vocative. I'm addressing the students to try to give them a sense that this is a dialogue. And I've thought a lot about what a syllabus is, and we often will hear the syllabus described as a contract. I think that's the wrong metaphor. I think that the CTL has really helped me to understand that the syllabus is a pedagogical instrument. It's my educational philosophy stated in practical terms. So it's really important for me now in my syllabus not just to say thou shalt not, but to actually explain to students why I do what I do, why I have certain expectations. My attendance policy is not arbitrary. If you miss X number of classes, you are missing a significant portion of the content, and that's why I expect you to be there and to be present. And I think that there's an ethical dimension to this as well, that I am approaching my students as thinking people who are capable of making choices and of being persuaded. So the syllabus is no longer, just my policies that I'm going to enforce, and this is a kind of coercive device that I have to keep my students in line. It's actually a lesson unto itself. It's a pedagogical document unto itself.
Yeah, thank you for that. We had the CTL has a podcast, Dead Ideas in Teaching and Learning. Please do turn in, like and subscribe. But we had a podcast guest on last semester, Kate Denial, who wrote A Pedagogy of Kindness. And one of the primary questions she asks is, who is the student you're imagining when you write your syllabus? And when you write that syllabus of like thou shall nots, who's the student that you're evoking here versus the students who actually show up in your classroom, who you want to form a relationship with, who you want to pull in with this document? So, Larry, I appreciate so much all of those comments about the ways that that document functions as a tool, because for most students, it's the first engagement that they have with their instructors before they ever meet you. They have perhaps looked at your syllabus on courseworks, and the first impressions matter, and that's a big first impression. Um, so I think we're going to transition a little bit to looking to the future. And lots of what we've talked about already, looking down the mountain, I imagine is going to carry us forward. But we find ourselves right now at a particular moment in the world. Higher education is in a state of flux, I think it would be fair to say. And also, we are confronted with all sorts of reasons to rethink our teaching, coming out of a global pandemic where we had to reconsider everything. Then AI came onto the scene, and we are asked to reconsider our teaching. And so, as we look through into the next 10 years, maybe my prediction is change is the only constant. But when you think about the future of teaching and learning, what excites you? What are you hopeful for as we look into the next decade? And I know I did this last time, but Monica, maybe we can start with you since you probably do have to go soon.
So I'm actually excited that facts, I know we won't have to deal with here, that's the wrong statement. That we won't, I don't want to say we don't have to deal with facts. We won't have to deal with the rote memorization that I think many of us experience, because that will be at your fingertips. This is not going to be about how much knowledge can I stuff into someone's brain over a course of a study period. What's going to be important is, how do I think? How do I actually put disparate pieces of information together? How do I actually connect the dots? How am I different than the AI tool that is there? And what is my understanding and interaction? And to me, that brings out the very thing that liberal arts education is good at, right? Like we are fundamentally creating citizens that can actually go out into the world and put disparate pieces of information together to come up with a new process, a new innovation. And to me, that's exciting because we were kind of weighed down with facts, with like this idea of like, these are the things you need to know, and I have to hope that you remember them over the course of a lifetime. Now it's in my pocket. I don't really need to know that. I know you need to know how to find it. I need to know when it's appropriate. I need to know, David, like what's real, what's facts, and what's misinformation. Like all of those things are part and parcel of what we are going to have to teach our learners about. And I think it's exciting. And then just to answer the question that was in the chat, I think the difference is that when you are early instructor, you're very close to the age, right? So you kind of know what the learner already needs to know. I think as you move, the learners stay the same age. You're the one that ages over time. Uh, is that you have to understand that your perspective is not the same. And I think we assume that our perspective is the same, and it's not. And, I have to remind myself of that actually quite often, that the learner has a different perspective than I do, and I have to be able to incorporate that. But to me, I think artificial intelligence and the tools that we'll have at our fingertips are exciting. And here, bring back the librarians, bring back the informationists, because those are the skills we're going to need.
That is, Monica, thank you for that. It's one of the most shining a light on the affordances of artificial intelligence and the tools that we find ourselves grappling with right now. Because we spend, CTL, we work with a lot of faculty, and one of the challenges is that there's so much content to cover in a semester. And I'm not saying we shouldn't cover the content we need to cover, but one of the challenges is finding space in a course or a curriculum to build skills, right? To make space for some of what you were describing, Larry, of team building, right? And building a community of learners. And, David, you were talking about giving people silence to reflect and think, and make it clear to them that they should take up space in this learning community. That can sometimes be perceived as being at odds with, like, I have to get through all of these things, but maybe we will find ourselves in 10 years in a moment where generative AI tools have lightened that lift a little bit, and we're instead teaching skill sets about evaluating the content we're looking at, just like you were saying, relying on our librarian colleagues to say, like, let's talk about information literacy, let's talk about digital literacy. How do you navigate and evaluate the content in a discipline? And then let's level up and apply it differently, or take some risks there. That's fascinating. Thank you. Um, David or Larry, this is who would like to go next? David, you unmuted, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, the tyranny of content, I have a selfless solution to. I only teach courses to non-science students in which the content's completely irrelevant, and the only thing that's important is they develop some skills. So that's how I get around that, not having to have a follow-on course where they need to know this set of facts. The thing I'm most excited about in the future is the young faculty we're hiring now. When I got to Columbia, which was 48 years ago, I had literally never taught anyone anything. I was not a TA in grad school, and so I had not taught anyone anything. And I was given a classroom of 60 students and told to lecture at them and not to spend too much time on it if I wanted to stay around Columbia for very long. That has radically changed. The faculty we're hiring today have all engaged extensively with their local centers for teaching and learning. They've all had experience teaching, and not just as TAs, teaching in local community colleges, teaching their own courses in summer school, teaching in prisons, teaching in all kinds of outreach activities. And they are prepared and equipped and modern in their thinking about pedagogy, which is just radically different than the situation 50 years ago. So that I find very encouraging. And the CTL's role in perpetuating this is seen in our graduate students. Just yesterday evening, we had a session, 20 people showed up with one of the graduate teaching fellows from the center. And it was about AI and how do we take different kinds of assignments, problem sets, lab reports, presentations, and how does AI impact that? How do we structure our assignments to take advantage of AI where it's appropriate and not where it's not? And it was a fascinating discussion with faculty members and grad students, all supported by the graduate teaching fellows from CTL.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, David. I think you're right. The amount of the focus on teaching and the amount of work that departments and disciplines, but also units like CTLs on campuses are offering graduate students in preparation for teaching has changed dramatically since I was in graduate school, which is actually longer than ago than I thought it was now that I'm doing the math. But and I felt like I had pretty good preparation. But it's I think you're right. It's certainly something that universities, and we're lucky to be at a university like Columbia that is investing in the work, like the CTL's graduate student programs and services team. So we're very lucky in that regard. Larry, oh, Monica, do you need to pop
Yeah,
on?
I'm gonna pop off and I want to say to you and your team that it's very exciting to celebrate this 10-year anniversary. I think we're excited that it's around. I think it's an important resource for the university, and I'm sorry to have to leave this conversation because it's been fun. So
It
thank you,
has been
Larry and
fun.
David.
Thank you.
Monica, thank you for joining us, and congratulations
Oh,
from
thank
all of
you.
us
Congratulations.
broadly on your award.
Thank you.
Bye. All right, Larry, what
Okay.
excites you about the future?
Well, two things excite me. And one is what Monica has already touched on, that I think that AI is a serious challenge to what we do, but it's also an opportunity for us to really think about what education is, what it should look like, what thinking really amounts to. The best statement about this that I have encountered recently actually goes back to 1962. It was a paper that Hannah Arendt presented before the Political Science Association, and she was presenting on her work that was published in On Revolution, her book from around this time. And she said that she assumes that thinking, insofar as it is not simply calculating, which is something that a machine could do better than the human mind, is always tied to experience. It is always tied to our biography in some way and our experiences in the world. And so I think that shifting us away from the accumulation of facts, from simply transmitting knowledge and expertise, to actually getting students to think about the meaning of those facts in their own lives is really crucial. And I think, as David is suggesting, it doesn't just have to happen in the humanities classes. Amanda, you've heard me talk a little bit about this before, that I think that technological change sometimes seems to give life to a lot of new research in teaching and learning, and a real spirit of experimentation. And back in 2012, I'm old enough to have been around long enough to remember this moment. There were these breathless pronouncements about the year of the MOOC, the massive open online course, which was supposed to change everything. And guess what? It didn't. But there was a lot of research that was being done around the MOOC that led to different practices in person in low tech classes, including what David was referring to earlier, trying to make lectures more interactive. Some of that was coming out of experiments that were happening in these large online courses. So I'm hoping that this can be a similar moment, that as AI has emerged, even those of us who are AI skeptics, even those of us who don't really see a space to use it in our own classes, can be attentive to the ways in which our teaching can adapt to this moment. Simply put, if what we're doing in the classroom is so easily replicated by a machine, then I think it's time for us to rethink what we're doing. So that's the first thing that really excites me. The second thing that really excites me is another kind of crisis that I think a lot about, which is the crisis of the humanities. The core is not exclusively humanities. We have frontiers of science, but the humanities do occupy a significant part of the core. I think this is one of the reasons why the humanities are really thriving at Columbia, but we're seeing that humanities programs are really struggling throughout the United States. I'm hoping that this also is an opportunity for us to think about a kind of renascent humanities. What is the humanities program of the future? What is it that we're trying to do with students in teaching them literature and philosophy? I'm very interested also in trying to get what we do in the classroom out into the world, engaging with people. We've been experimenting with something we call humanities busking in the core, which is the idea of really just kind of going out into public spaces and trying to engage people around humanistic works that require no background, no credentials, no real advanced training, but are just fostering those kinds of conversations. So I think this is a moment for us to really think creatively, imaginatively about what the future of the humanities might look like and how we really take the rich experience that students have in the classroom with philosophy, literature, art, music, other humanistic disciplines out into the world so that other people who might not otherwise have the opportunity really can get some experience with those works.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it's a fantastic thing to think about. And one of the things that has struck me a little bit about the responses from the our three panelists, now the two of you, um, is in the face of drawing on something that you said, Larry, about when the age of the MOOC, and is this the end of higher ed, right? Or will it dramatically change the way that we operate? Is this focus on the in-person, like the capitalizing on when we're all together, right? And like so connecting to like going out into sharing humanities and I'm just thinking about the active learning experiences that you were sharing, David. And I don't know, it seems like it is connected in some way that, in the face of AI or a technological innovation that we're all sort of grappling with and how we move forward as a teaching community, that sometimes going back to, dare I say, the basics and saying, like, let's turn and talk to one another and focus on who we are in this room, or let's think about how the community or how humanities interacts with society, or, even just as simple as being in the classroom. And maybe you do have to do some direct teaching and lecturing for 10 minutes, but just handing your student the whiteboard marker and saying, you take notes for the class today, right? If that's an expectation that you've set up, that um, there's just so much that we can do to emphasize the community that we have and leverage those experiences with students. So um, thank you. Thank you both. I have some more topics that we can talk about, but this is just a reminder for everyone who is joining us from home that you can submit questions in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. I know that we've had some come in, but just to give folks an opportunity to ask some more so that we can post them to our panelists before the end of our time together. I mentioned a couple of times as we wait for more questions to come in, this idea of making predictions for the future. And I think some of that was embedded in what you were talking about, being excited about. But do we have predictions for what we think the next 10 years might hold for us in higher ed? Things that we expect to see or hope to see?
I'll take hope to see rather than expect to see because
Let's
that's
do it.
less depressing. Um, what I hope to see, and I'm not predicting this, but I would like to see it, is the breaking down of the 19th century walls around disciplines.
Hmm.
I mean, in the physical sciences, if you come to Columbia or any other university in the United States, and you say you want to study something in the physical sciences, what do you do in the first semester? You take 17th century math and 17th century physics, and maybe if you're doing it 19th century chemistry. This is just not the way to introduce people to the concepts and to the problems and to the opportunities in science. What's interesting today is happening at the interstices of the disciplines. We're still organized by departments, by disciplines, by majors, and it's stultifying and it's a turnoff to many people who come in to the university and wanting to do science. Instead of talking about the physics and chemistry and geology of climate change, we talk about Newtonian physics and Daltonian chemistry. And I would just love to see an opportunity created by some forward-looking university that dissolve these departmental boundaries, especially for introductory students in STEM.
Thank you, David. I can distinctly remember as an undergraduate the day when I recognized a concept that was being discussed in my literature class as appearing in my economics class. Like when just as a first year college student, I was like, wait a minute. Do they know? Are they aware that the like and I was just stunned by the connections. Like we should get these professors together. They must know. And of course, like they have long views of their disciplines. Of course they think about it, but those connections aren't explicit to students because we're novice learners. We're trying to make all these connections on the fly. So I think you're right. I think that helping to break down those barriers and create, I think folks call it, what is it, information fluency between disciplines would be extraordinary. It was transformative for me as a learner, however many years ago. Larry?
I think that's exactly right. And David, you'll appreciate this. I was at a science festival in Poland about a year and a half ago, and I thought I was going to be the lone humanist who was at that festival, and I wasn't by any means. And it was an enormous festival. It was about, I think, 75,000 people attended this festival over the course of 2 or 3 days, which puts it actually makes it larger than the Sundance Film Festival. But one of the things that I was really struck by at that conference was how much the scientists kept going right into the territory that we would have thought of as the humanities.
Hmm.
They were saying, the science, and David, I think this is also part of what you say when you deliver your lectures in Frontiers of Science, that the science of some of these problems, such as climate change, is it's worked out. We understand it. There's a broad consensus around this science. But the problem is what we do with that knowledge and where we go with that. And that really means being able to communicate. It means being able to listen. It means really being educated very broadly in a whole range of what we would think of as disciplines and the skills that are associated with those disciplines. So I heartily endorse what you've said, David. And I would just say that also implicit in that call, I think, is a real shift to thinking about problems also, trying to approach education not merely as, here's the knowledge that you're going to need eventually to solve these problems that you will encounter once you are credentialed enough and experienced enough to think about these problems, but actually start with the problems. Get people thinking about some of these problems, whether they're scientific problems, technical problems, social problems, whatever they might be. Get them thinking about them and talking about them and use that as a way into the knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I actually designed a fantasy introductory curriculum at Columbia around that model. And in the process, I interviewed the faculty who teach the big introductory STEM courses in each department. And I asked one department person, how much of what you teach in the first semester is absolutely essential for the going on in your discipline? And the person thought for a few minutes and said, 2 weeks. So the other 12 weeks presumably is there because it was there for the professor and it was there for the professor's professor. And since they're now a success, it must be the right way to do things. But if you think about the problem, the answer is the much narrower range of facts you need to start thinking productively and creatively about how to solve the problem.
And
What
something like climate change is not just a problem for biologists or for physicists or for politicians or economists or sociologists. It's a problem that is going to require those approaches and skills and habits of mind from all of those areas and more.
I wonder what it would be like if we got representatives from disciplines together and said, like, what are the problems that we're all trying to solve together? And how do we share that with our student? How do we engage our students in that work? What the overlap would look like. I think you offered a great example in climate change, Larry, for sure. And it feels to learners, I imagine, real, right? Like it's anytime you do something that sort of breaks down this artificial divide between like what happens in class and the real world, because we all know there's just one world, but that that all of a sudden what you're doing in the classroom has consequences for the rest of our lives, right? That's a learning project that I think it would be fascinating and engaging for any learner. They're always we talk about this in the CTL as authentic learning experiences, right? Ones that students can see as connected to their lives, and those are the ones that are really meaningful. We have a question that has come in from our audience that's connected to this breaking down of barriers and walls between disciplines and talking about problems. And so, um, wondering how you might see this progressing over the next 10 years, and are there opportunities for transdisciplinary or team taught classes where faculty from different disciplines can bring these perspectives to bear in the same class with the same groups of students?
Yeah, well, this fantasy proposal that I prepared envisioned getting 3 or 4 faculty members from different disciplines together, picking 3 problems, say, that would occupy the first year, and extracting the essential things that one needed to know mathematically, physically, chemically, geologically, astronomically, whatever, and and then developing a curriculum that made sure those key things got taught, but in fact were taught all in context of a problem like climate change or the maldistribution of medical services in our society or things like that. And it's an interesting, it's sufficiently interesting that some people could actually coalesce around this idea and make an attempt at it. The problem, of course, is the structure of academia, whereas the senior faculty don't feel the need to do it, and the junior faculty would be afraid to do it, and so no one does it. But creating some reward system that acknowledged the importance of that, I think, would go a long way to making it happen, because I think the interest in it is there.
And I'll just add, I think we have some model for this with the core curriculum, Frontiers of Science being an excellent example of this, of course, which is organized around 4 problems and uses these interdisciplinary methods to try to address those problems. But even in the humanities courses that we have, literature humanities, a year-long course that our first-year students take at Columbia, is taught by faculty who are coming from 16 or 17 different departments. So we have people. I was talking to one colleague who is a scholar of the 20th century novel, and particularly the post-war novel, who said, I teach this entire year-long course, and it's only the last work that we read, Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon, where I'm actually an expert on this. So general education, I think, is one of these spaces where we have the opportunity to be creative, and we have the opportunity to think about knowledge and education in terms of problems, in terms of the kinds of things that our students are coming in thinking about and eager to engage with. For too often, general education, I think, has been something of an afterthought. It's been a checklist of courses that people might have to take. It's been a space for different departments to try to bolster their enrollments because they don't have enough majors. But really thinking very creatively about general education as a space in which we don't necessarily need to have expertise from day one until the final day of the semester, and where we can be more collaborative and where we can be a little more we can do more problem-based learning. For me, I think that's where universities should try to focus on this breakdown of these disciplinary walls.
Thank you. I can't believe it, but we are nearing the end of our time together today. It has flown by. And so I want to end with a question that has come into the Q&A, and it talks about messages of hope for the future. So the question reads that, we haven't spent much time talking about this, though I think that we've alluded to it, that higher education is in the face of some uncertainty, a lot of uncertainty right now. And we are working with an extraordinary teaching community at Columbia that is continuing to facilitate incredible learning experience for students, even in the face of a lot of uncertainty about the future. And so what messages of hope could you close with for folks who are teaching right now in this general space of uncertainty as we look forward to the future? What are some rays of light that we might be able to provide?
I'll say quickly that I think hope is really at the heart of what we do. We wouldn't do what we did if we didn't have hope for the future, if we didn't believe that the errors and superstitions and mistakes of the past couldn't be transcended and overcome through the work that we do as educators. So I think it's critical for us to try to hold on to that. For me, my hope is renewed every August when a new group of students arrive and I see their energy and their eagerness to learn and their curiosity. And then every May when I see those same groups going out into the world and I again see a little more wisdom, a little more experience, but that same enthusiasm as they go out into the world. There's a passage from the philosopher Stanley Cavell that I keep at the forefront of my mind all the time. And Amanda, I think you've probably heard me quote from this many times, but it's from his magnum opus, The Claim of Reason. And it's in which he describes the education of grown-ups. And he's got a scene which he borrows from Ludwig Wittgenstein of the educator trying to educate the child, and the child isn't really getting the lesson. And then he talks about the child posing unanswerable questions to the educator, the kinds of questions that philosophers deal with and grapple with, questions that are really difficult for us to be able to answer. And he talks about the way in which the educator is transformed then by those questions. And for me, that's really crucial in all of this also to, not only to respond to my students' curiosity and enthusiasm to learn, but also to really let them model for me what inquiry looks like and what learning might look like. And so I think of my role as in some ways as being a kind of learner, in the classroom, that I'm trying to learn just as much as I'm trying to teach. And what I'm learning from my students is that curiosity that they're bringing in. So that's where I find hope.
Thank you, Larry. David?
Well, this is going to sound like an odd response to that question, but in the last couple of semesters, Columbia has started a program of auditing classes for adults who are interested. And this past semester, I got 25 people wanting to sign up for my class. These are mostly septuagenarians and octogenarians who have managed to retain the 5-year-old curiosity, which is what Larry's talking about and what we all like to see in our students. And they're terrific. I mean, their attendance is 100%. They do all the work, even though they don't have to. They have most of the good questions. And so it's not the case that our society is somehow degenerated away so that no one has any interest in my case, very arcane and impractical ideas about the way the universe works. They're still out there. And so I guess I find that hopeful.
I do too. Thank you. Thanks to both of you. I'm feeling more hopeful, truly. Even now, it's inspiring, and it has been fantastic talking with both of you and Monica, who had to leave us as early. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our viewers at home, thank you so much for being here and engaging with us. I hope something that you heard today sparked a new idea. If anything resonated with you, or if you would like to think more about teaching and learning and partner with the CTL, we would love to connect with you. You can always reach out to us at columbia.ctl@columbia.edu, and let's keep learning and innovating together. This is just the beginning. Thank you both so much.